Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? Geoff Mosher, Adam Caplan. Adam, this is going to be a very important Inside the Birds episode. We are talking right now about a real crossroads for the Philadelphia Eagles, as for the second straight year, they need an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. And this time, there's more complexities involved in the search. And as we kind of we'll talk some names, but we've already given a lot of names out. Some of names we heard, some would just naturally fit what we know they're looking for. There's a lot of time, there's going to be more interviews, and we'll talk about that. But I think we can really give our listeners and viewers an idea of what makes this search different this time around and why there are some layers of complexity into it. Now, Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman are going to have a press conference today, finally. And they're going to be asked a lot of questions that might go concurrent with what we're going to talk about, but I don't think they're going to answer any of them
No.
to any extent. So I don't know that anybody's going to come away after watching that press conference and have a really good idea of what the team is looking for, why they're looking for it, and how they plan to go get it. But this is an interesting search for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it's funny. So you and I do the and Andrew DeCecco, we all do the football four with Mike Gill, and Mike asked us both this week about, well, what would you, if you were there, would you ask? And I joke, I said, because I haven't been to an Eagles press conference, I don't know how many years, but I jokingly said, well, I don't know if I want to be there because I'm the idiot who asked Sean McDermott about Ernie Sims, and he said he called him a shark in the water. Not proud of that one. I said I knew that Ernie Sims overran plays. I knew what the issues were, but I just want to know what his thoughts were. And some things I never forget. Some of the questions I've asked the coaches over the years, Jim, going back, one of my favorite coaches of all time, Jim Johnson. But you go to this one. So like I said to Mike, I would talk about Brian Johnson, who was let go. I mean, so see, it's what you talked about. There's no way Nick's good. Look, we know he had his meeting last Friday with Jeffrey and Howie together, and I think you put it. You said Julian was there too, I think, when
Yeah.
you're reporting on this. And I'm thinking, like, Sirianni's not going to tell the truth. It's just. But my thing is, man, get it right, okay? Because he said when he was asked in season, and Nick defended Johnson, but hey, it's my scheme. If you want to blame me, you want to blame me. Well, that's a bit, that's right now the issue going forward here with this offense.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing? Like we talked about, for what we've heard, West Coast system is one thing, and we'll get into that more. But there are also other good coaches out there. They're former OCs, from other teams. It doesn't have to be like a new, one of these up and coming guys. And I'm just interested, as you said, this search is fascinating. But I would go right at Brian Johnson. What happened? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why is this happening now? And you're looking for two coordinators, not one. This is, for a guy just made the Super Bowl last year, this is not good.
Yeah. Yeah, I am with you, and we are fortunate that Andrew DeCecco, who has been doing a tremendous job for us all for a long time, but especially this season, really came into his own. He will be at the press conference. He'll have some questions. Hopefully, he'll be able to get in. His coverage will be on InsideTheBirds.com after, so make sure you're checking it out. But I would say this: if I were at the press conference, I'm right there with you in terms of the tone and what I seek to find out in my question asking about both Brian Johnson and Sean Desai, and they would be they would be different. So for Brian Johnson, as you're mentioning, Adam, I would really want to know from Nick Sirianni how much autonomy Brian Johnson had in the offense, because every time throughout the season he was asked about the play calling issues, the criticism for Brian Johnson, Nick Sirianni would be very quick to defend and say, this is not a Brian Johnson offense. He wasn't saying that out of disrespect. He was saying, this is my offense, as we talk about all the time. He's calling plays that we all come up with, but it is really in my vision. And there are people who will tell you, who know Brian Johnson, who will say what he's did or the calls he played this year for the Eagles, plays he called, not necessarily the same type of offense he ran when he was a coordinator at Florida or before that. Where was it, Houston?
Two
or
other schools, I
no,
think Mississippi State with Dak,
Mississippi, right, with
right,
Dak. So
and one other school, yeah.
so I would want to understand that. Then I would want to understand if Brian Johnson is calling your offense, why is Brian Johnson taking the fall? Which again, you're not going to get a clear answer on that. But then my second question would
You
be,
gotta ask it though, but
oh yeah, you
you're
absolutely have
close.
to answer it.
And if
Ask
I
it.
like, again, if I'm going to ask a question, I'm gonna ask him flat out, is your new offensive coordinator gonna be able to run his system?
Hmm.
Because Nick does not run a true West Coast. Like 10 people have told me that. It's a mixture of other schemes. So if they hire a West Coast guy or they want to hire a West Coast guy, or when you interview these guys, or whoever they are, is this if you really like someone, can they run their system? You would think yes,
Hmm.
but we'll see. This is a very interesting, as you said. I totally agree with you. This is an interesting challenge for Sirianni. This is not something I would think about a year ago, but here we are.
Yes, and the second question I would have for him related to defense, which I'm positive he would not answer truthfully or give you much on, but I almost want to see how quickly he can think on his feet, is that he, like many coaches, he has said that when things are not going well, you don't just switch. You double down on the things that you believe to be true and right. And if you have good execution and have a good process, eventually it'll get itself straightened. But that is not the action that he took or the organization took when it came to Sean Desai. At the earliest signs of cracks in the foundation or not happy with this or that, they made a very dramatic change, a change that was for the worse, proved to be for the worse, but it was certainly the opposite of doubling down on what you do, right? So I would ask him why that situation he felt, well, I would say, do you believe that that's a deviation from what you've said? And if so, why? And sort of see how he circumlocuted his way around that question. But I think that those are the two most legit questions, because if you were to get an honest answer out of him, you might know a little bit more about what he's looking for going ahead now, as he has to find a new play caller on offense and defense. And you might get a sense of whether or not the panic button is always going to be half push with both him, Howie, ownership, management, however you want to talk about it. I mean, we've seen this before. So we know that with upper management, the panic button is always a little bit half pushed. We've seen that with guys getting hired and fired really quickly after seasons of expectations not being met. So I just wonder if Nick Sirianni sort of fits that mold, or if he learned something from the way this season went.
You hit on it as you were discussing it. It's about not meeting expectations. Yes, they had 11 wins, but they had a total collapse. Another question I'd ask, this is good discussion. The next question I would follow up, I got, because they don't do it like other teams do, like the PR guy will call in the reporter. It's a free for all, as you well know, and it's gonna be a pain in the ass because you think you got a good question and someone else bogarts it, or bogarts what you're trying to do. Is
Mm-hmm.
get a question and they
Mm-hmm.
take your space. But I would say, like, okay, what happened? Why did you guys fail? Now, this is another one he probably won't answer. But what happened? Why the collapse? And I go, Nick, let's face it. You guys weren't competitive against Tampa Bay. I don't care what you say. Of course, he
Mm-hmm.
would shut me down if I said it that way. But
Mm-hmm.
but what if you and I were running the show and we had him in, like, he reported to us. One of the things you would say to him, what the hell happened? And how could you not be competitive? You didn't even show up against Tampa. How does that happen?
Right. Right.
I want an answer.
Right. No, I think that would be I would love to hear that too, but I sort of can predict the sort of
Well,
stammering, meandering,
exactly.
every which
Exactly.
way. You know what he reminds me of? You remember Wizard of Oz when the guy says each direction, like he points right with his left hand and left with his right hand. Yeah, you got to go that. That's what, like, a
Yeah.
conversation I feel like with Nick Sirianni. It just goes in a direction that it didn't start that way. It ended that way. The middle was all twisted up. So that's again, I just you're just not going to get what you want most likely. I do want to highlight for you a quote that I was referring to.
Yeah.
And this was fairly recently. This is December 20th. So, maybe with just one or two games left in the season. And Nick was asked about Brian Johnson's play calling and the criticism. And Nick says, quote, "We have to put players in positions to create explosive plays, but make no mistake about it. This offense is being run the exact same way the offense was run last year and before that. This offense is my offense, right? This is my offense. So the criticism on the offense, I think, unfairly goes to Brian. Brian calls the plays. Unfairly goes to Brian. The criticism on this offense should come at me because this is my offense. Now, we know that some of that is coach speak. That's what Andy Reid would say, right? It's I got to do a better job. There's a tinge of I got to do a better job in there, which is like, I think I'm doing fine. It's just they're not executing, and I got to make sure they execute better. But that was not the first time he has said that. He said that ever since he gave up play calling to Shane Steichen last year, or I'm sorry, 2 years ago, that it was always going to be his offense. So as we go forward with this, it kind of makes you wonder, not just us as media or a fan base, but what about other potential offensive coordinators who may want this job and listen to that kind of comment being made? I think that it creates an interesting dynamic that we'll talk about. Inside the Birds, of course, is presented by our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. It is the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. We have some interesting stuff coming up as you and I are going to be in Mobile, Alabama next week, site of the Senior Bowl. Looking forward to that. It's been a while for me. You've been there every year, but I have not been there in several years. In fact, when last time I was there, they were still doing the practices at different places and Lad Peebles
Oh, yeah.
Stadium and all
Yeah.
that. So I'm going to need a refresher course from you, my friend, when I get down
So
there.
it's at the University of South Alabama. That's where all the practices are.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, now let's not jinx it, but the weather now looks like it
Oh,
might be
don't
bad.
say anything.
Yeah, yes. So what we're gonna do next Wednesday night? We've never done this before. We have not done for Patreon. We've never done anything on the road, but you and I are going to do it. We're also showing up on. I showed up, put a little note on Discord, kind of an interesting note. We're also on Discord, so for our members, so we will show up there occasionally as well. If you want to sign up, patreon.com/inside the birds.
There you go. Patreon.com/inside the birds. Good stuff. Want to welcome our new followers as well. All right. So let's just get to this part of it. The press conference that's going to happen today. Are you expecting, we already talked about Nick Sirianni. Are you expecting Howie to address, Howie's usually pretty good at giving you, even if you think if it's not genuine, an I screwed up every once in a while, right? Like he's always after the
Yeah.
fact. I remember
Sure.
after the first Super Bowl win in 2017, when things didn't go their way in 18 and 19, he said,
Yeah.
I was married to too many old players. I have a tough time doing that. And then even after things went south with Doug and Carson, he took some accountability for that. But do you believe he will take some accountability for the way he rebuilt this defensive back end from linebacker to corner to safety?
I mean, he's not. I hear you, and yes, Howie surprises me sometimes like when he said what you just talked about. It would kind of surprise me that he would admit that, but which I appreciate it, because I think anyone who's really who looked at the roster is like they were trying to they're trying to run it back, which you could understand, but for
Yep.
him to admit that was interesting, and to talk about, hey, he's also had a connection with a lot of the veteran players. That's cool. I mean, I appreciate him talking about that, but. I look, like it's again, you look at the roster, right? They should be better than they were, but the roster had holes. It's in defense. The offense, I mean, what offense coordinator wouldn't want the roster, right?
Right.
We'll get that in a minute,
Yeah,
but
we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, but if you're a
defensively,
defensive coordinator, you're like, I
that's
always
the
go back
thing.
to
That's the
Luke.
thing.
Go ahead.
Like that's the thing. I was just going to say that's the thing that they have to get through, and we'll get into that as well. Um, getting back to what you're saying at the top here. This is the intriguing part of both the OC and the DC jobs being open. How these, because we talked to coaching agents last week who said, oh yeah, they're going to be moving on from this guy, that guy. This is going to happen, because I guess they know, because this is their job to know that. And they're like, boy, they're really shaking things up there. I'm like, well, look, when you fall off like this, folks, this is what's going to happen. When you have an owner that's demanding, and I think in a good way. I didn't say Jeffrey's always right, but he wants excellence. The fans want excellence, and this fall off, man. I still can't wrap my hands around how bad they were to end the season.
Mhm.
That to me is just everybody's. I think everyone, their mother's calling it a collapse, and it's very fair.
Mhm.
I just would love to know today. Again, getting back to the one question I definitely would want is what the hell happened?
Yeah, what the hell happened?
And I
Yeah,
know he won't answer, but
Adam,
he's
that
got
might be a
can you
30 for
imagine?
30 more than a press
Right, exactly, right. Oh
conference.
my God, that's a great one. Can you imagine a 30 for the Eagles collapse?
Yes.
Next on 30 for 30. Back in what year's the 2023 season? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so before we move off of the press conference and Howie, he does have this funny way though of always sliding in an excuse or a line that makes absolutely no sense and almost leaves him open to more criticism at times. I'm going to go back to his decision to trade Eric Rowe after 1 year when the reality was that Jim Schwartz just didn't like him. I mean, he played Jalen
Exactly.
Mills to beat him out.
Yeah.
And Howie's response for trading him after using a second round pick
And, yeah.
was, well, he didn't have a good one first year, right? We didn't see him a whole lot, and you only get 3 years to really decide if you're going to give a guy a contract extension. So we just didn't think there was enough time left.
That
It
was
it
crazy. I
was it
remember like,
was the
what?
most ridiculous
Talking about,
explanation
yeah.
I had ever heard in my
That
life.
was definitely the look, he couldn't tell the truth there,
I
obviously.
couldn't.
But that was fun. That's so funny. Man, you got a good memory, man. I totally forgot about that.
How do
That's
you forget something like that?
no, but I haven't we haven't talked about it because we started our show in 2018.
Yeah, I might have brought that up once or twice in our stories.
Did we? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That was a funny one. Look, I get. Look, can you imagine being in their shoes right now, holding this I mean, it's like they have to do this, you know? You have to because you have to talk about it, and then, "Oh, Nick, you're back. Oh, good to know." It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into a couple of more things. First, let's take a break to hear from our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
Okay. So maybe one of the most difficult questions to answer will be one of the more obvious ones. Someone is going to ask, I imagine, have you fired Brian Johnson? And
Oh, because they don't yeah, you don't
well, I mean, our friend Derek Gunn reported he's not coming back. Then it became like kind of made its way around. Like you and I were already talking about, they're looking for a new offensive play
we
caller.
knew
So
that, yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
it's not going to be Brian Johnson. But I guess maybe some people thought, well, maybe he'll get reassigned, which is,
That was wrong. I don't know where that came who
no.
did
But if you think about what happened to Sean Desai, I guess I could see where people might think that might be the
people are
case. But
speculating. I'm like, "What? There's just no way." It's just
right.
I hear, I feel bad for Brian Johnson in one way. It word leaks out, okay, that they were looking.
Hmm.
It's just like they should have just let the guy go last week. Why didn't they just I don't know. I'm kind of like not understanding like why they didn't just do this last week, you know? It's
Well, I
just
think we know. I think we have an
well, I
idea why.
because
And
he's
if
up for jobs and
right.
yeah.
And obviously, if the Eagles can get compensation for Brian Johnson getting a job somewhere, they're going
Yeah.
to want draft
Well,
compensation.
he's
And that
not
would be
getting yeah,
because of the newer. How old is this? 2 or 3 years now. Where
yeah, at least 3 years, yeah. If you Minority gets a head coaching job, like a
we're a
high
GM,
yeah,
right?
GM or yeah, right,
Right.
and it's just a I don't know, I thought they could have treated him better, it's a shame, that
Yeah.
it's the human part of this thing. I know folks, they want him out, I get fans want him out, but this until you really until you get to know coaches and you feel, man, I've never met the guy, I don't know him, I just hate that he has to find out that way, but it's our job. As soon as we found out, that this is happening, that
Yeah. Of
they're looking, we're like, we got to let our viewers and listeners know. But
course.
well, anyway,
Is it possible, Adam, that Brian Johnson's not upset about not being technically fired yet because that means he would still be under contract and be able to be paid as a paid employee of the Eagle? I don't know how paychecks work for coordinators, like if he's already paid full for the season, but like when you're under contract, you still technically have to be paid. So maybe there's
um,
a part of this where he's all listen, the disappointment is there, but at least he's employed currently right now.
well, here's a question. So typically, coordinators get 2 or 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
on their contract. With 2 years on a rollover is a typical coaching contract, for an assistant. But
Right.
coordinators now get 2 or 3 years. So I mean, I'm assuming, I don't know. Now you bring this up, I hadn't even thought of that. I wonder what his contract situation was, because
Yeah,
we reported back in March that, or where the hell, whenever the hell they hired him at the combine, that Desai had a 3-year deal. So,
right.
we'll see. I don't know. It's a
Well,
good question.
typically, let's just reason this out. This was year 3 for Brian. So
Yeah.
I would imagine if he had signed a 2-year deal for the start, that 2-year deal would have been up last year. And if they promoted him to coordinator, you would think that would have
Yeah.
also come
Duh.
with a
Of course
2-year
he did.
deal.
Yeah. Good point.
So
Thank
he's
you.
probably still
Yeah.
under contract. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
He
he,
absolutely has to be.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he's probably
Like,
like, just take your time firing me, like officially, you know?
right. Like with Wink Martindale, he had a mutual party, which means that he's out of contract.
Mhm.
So any team that wants him, they don't have to worry about well, they would probably like a contract offset so he can be basically working for free in a way, but
Right.
because the previous club would pay him. So that's kind of fascinating. But look, the bottom line is it's a shame that you find out that they're looking for somebody while you're still employed, but it is
Mhm.
what it is. And then I'm like you said, I'm very interested to see what Sirianni says today. It's that on that one is fun. Look, as much as Nick doesn't want to say anything, these coaches don't. I'm still loving. I'm still loving that there's so many subjects you could. I mean, this literally could be a 2-hour press conference. It won't be. It'll be like 25 minutes.
Oh yeah.
There's so much to unpack with this season. Way more than
100%.
anticipated.
Yeah. But our friends at PR, Bob and Brett they're gonna have the stopwatches in their hand. 2 minutes left. 2 minutes, like the
Oh, I
old
know.
Jericho Waco. Two more
Oh my
questions.
God,
2 more
man.
questions.
But here's the thing: Nick won't speak until the owners' meetings,
uh,
and Howie won't do another press conference, I'm sure. So, well, he does that little impromptu thing at the owners' meetings or the
right.
combine. I guess he usually talks at the combine, but that's the next time. Well, Nick, we'll see. He doesn't have to. Head coaches don't have to at the combine. I know the league will ask him.
Right.
We'll see. But yeah, this is it's kind of, look. There's a lot to unpack with what's going on here.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
So let's talk now about the offensive coordinator search, because the only real name that's kind of out there, as far as, well, I mean, we've put some names out there, but one of them, Shane Waldron's already taken the job. So, I don't know if they couldn't get to him fast enough, but it sounded like that Bears job had his name all over it for a while there. So that's great for Shane, and good, by the way, good for the Bears. I think that's a really good
Yeah.
hire for them. So we'll see what they do with their quarterback situation. But
Job he did with Geno Smith was amazing. Geno
very
Smith
good.
went from a guy nobody wanted, the Seahawks only saw as a backup, and he one of the most amazing. It took him 10 years to arrive. It's really remarkable.
Yeah. And I think it speaks well of his understudy, Dave Canales, doing a nice job in Tampa Bay, because it's sort of like Waldron has his own little tree now, and he hasn't even been head coach yet. So that's
What's
pretty
crazy?
interesting there. Yeah.
Yep, with Canales, if he gets a head coaching job, Thad Lewis is there. Remember Thad Lewis who was with the Eagles for a short time in training
Yep.
camp many years ago?
Yes.
He actually would be the in-house replacement if they don't look outside. He probably would be the guy.
There's got to be like a 6 degrees of some Eagle that like
Gerard
everybody
Johnson.
we could
Gerard
connect.
Johnson.
Gerard Johnson. Yeah, we
Yeah.
talked about him.
Yeah.
So the thing on Jim Bob Cooter, and I want to make this, I think you would agree with me on this. I want to make this clear. A lot of the first names that you see in the interview cycle, a lot of that is because they're available at the moment, and either they're A, unemployed, or B, if they're working for a team, the team is not in the playoffs, right? So it's easier to get those guys in your building. Ron Rivera, his team is not in the playoffs, right? He's been fired. So that's 2 of the check marks. It's easy to get him in now. It's a little tougher if you want to speak to somebody right now on the Niners, because they're in the middle of the playoffs. Same thing with the Houston Texans, unless it's, the offensive coordinator can, but any other position coaches, right? It's a little bit more difficult for that. So people are wondering, why aren't we hearing more names? Why aren't we seeing more names? Got to give this thing time. I don't know if you got the sense. I don't know that I sense that Jim Bob Cooter, just because his name was out there first, is like the guy that they're dying to bring in. And I can't. We talked about this last podcast.
Yep.
He has been a play caller. It makes sense. He does have connection to Sirianni. I've tried to talk to some people who have worked with him or know him, whatever. And listen, like, people are nice. They think he's smart, very smart guy. But nobody banged the table and said this guy offensive mastermind either, or does some really imaginative, creative stuff either. So I didn't know whether to continue to be kind of meh about it, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I thought you had a really good point when we did our Monday show. You said, look, how's that solve? You're just going back to the same scheme, because he knows Nick. And again, would he run his own scheme? Which is somewhat he learned. He's worked with Adam Gase many years ago, and some other coaches. But
Caldwell,
what's that?
Jim Caldwell.
Right. Would he be able to run? Because this is the thing we don't know. And I'm hoping the reporters do a good enough job to ask the right questions. Sometimes they nail it, sometimes they miss on it. But I would hope that they would ask, hey, is this guy getting this all to whoever they hire? Whether it's a West Coast guy that he run, because that's completely different from what they do here now. And plus Jalen, we're going to talk about this as well. As a league source told me earlier this week, if you're running a true West Coast, go through every West Coast coach, true West Coast guys, and see how many guys are running quarterback.
Yeah.
It's typically not, if it's an old school West Coast offense, about timing its rhythm, getting the ball out. And, what are you really doing with Jalen? Because when Jalen was special at 22, it was about starting with him with a run game. Okay. That's where it started. He was awesome. This season, he was not. I don't care what the numbers say. We all saw it. He wasn't good enough. And the coaching had to be better. So you have to make a decision about what you're doing, because it's got to start with him.
Right.
And we were talking about this on 973 with Gil on Tuesday. It's got to start with him. I know they brought it up with your segment on Monday, but Ron Rothstein brought up a great point. When Jalen was special, the offense totally started with him, worked off of him in a run and pass game. We know that they want to be a pass game. That as long as Jeffrey's the owner, that's going to happen. But man, they got to get back to being and as long as you and I have covered this team, 17, they were fun. They obviously were a very good offense, but nothing like 22 is pyrotechnics, man. That thing was incredible.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because then this really might be a crossroads point for this organization, more so than even just finding the right play caller. It's the identity that you want with your quarterback in the confines of your offense. And I wanted to talk about this. I'm glad you said that, because it was clear from the first 3 or 4 games of the season, even before Jalen Hurts hurt his knee, that they were going to use less zone read, less quarterback keeper. He was scrambling, but he wasn't running design runs as nearly as much as they were doing last year. Now, whether that was because they were trying to evolve the offense and make it more West Coast than West Coast modified with RPO and zone read, or whether that had something to do with Jalen not wanting to get hurt, and running. Obviously, when you run like that, you can get hurt. He had hurt his shoulder and collarbone the year before. He had hurt his ankle the year before that, and he still wound up hurting his knee this year. I don't know. I have no idea. But to your point, it did look like the offense this year. It didn't look. It was. I mean, we were talking the first 3 or 4 games about how much fewer Jalen was running naturally. He was scrambling, but he was not running on keepers. And were they trying to gravitate more toward a newer version of the West Coast offense?
Well, we asked Avant and Cosell on our pregame show, does Jalen look right? Because remember, he just didn't look like the first game against New England, right? They barely won the game. I mean, they won it somehow, but it didn't look right. And remember, it was almost like they told him this year, get down. We noticed that in week 1. It just didn't. It looked weird. We're like, okay, well, this is only one game. You can't really read in too much.
Right.
But then after a series of games, like, wow, this doesn't look the same. And now what Greg said was that he thought that Greg brought this up a couple weeks ago. He felt that based on his tape study that teams caught up to the Eagles. And I know from talking to some guys around the league, and because it's like sort of a hackneyed term. Oh, teams spent all offseason studying your offense. It's not quite like that, but there's a lot of truth in it, where the pro personnel guys do the advance. They see who the schedule is. You're getting ready for week 1, but you've got everybody saw what Philly did last year. So if you're going to play them, you're like, okay, we're stopping. We're not letting Hurts beat us with this leg. Just not going to do that. And Nick didn't find Act 2. That to me is the biggest indictment of Sirianni last season. Like, you got it. Because he doesn't have this experience. He didn't call plays in Indy. Okay. He tried it in year 1. To his credit, he gave it up after 7 games when they're 2-5, and that's quite frankly saved their season.
Yeah.
Great job. But and I'm not saying they had it easy in 22, but they took the league by storm. No one could figure it out. They were incredible. And then when they figured it out, he didn't have an act two. And this is, we'll see, again, who's the player caller is going to be, but that's the thing that Nick has to do a better job of. Whoever he brings in, he's got to make sure that he understands what they want to do if they're going to get autonomy, and let them do what they have to do. But if the guy needs help, you don't micromanage him, but he's got to help the guy find an act two if it comes to that.
Right. And that's where we get to the point where you wonder the mentality of both Nick Sirianni with this hire and the mentality of the person sitting in the chair across from Nick and Howie and Jeffrey and Julian, who are, because they're going to ask questions too. And if you're someone who comes from a Shanahan tree, a McVay tree, I'm trying to think of another good, unfortunately, those are the two hottest names all the time, but, or a Ben Johnson type of guy, whatever. And you sit in the chair and you say, hey, here's what I do, right? I use shift. I use motion. I will line up my running back as a receiver. I'll line up my receiver and run as a running back and do jet motion, right? But Nick Sirianni says, well, I don't use motion, that way. And that's not really what I'm looking to do. Well, then what are we doing here? You know what I'm saying? So the autonomy part of this offense has to be a big question. How much is Nick willing to give to the play caller? And how much will that play caller then take that as I can do what I want? Or I'm not sure if this is still, he's saying I can do what I want, but he's going to be a big part of the offense. There may be Nick may say the right things, but there might be a reluctance of someone who's sitting in the chair saying, is this guy really going to let me run all this motion? Like, I'm a Shanahan guy. I'm a McVay guy. I want to do shifts and motions. He does the least of it in the NFL. Am I really sitting here and I'm going to believe he's just going to hand over his offense to me? That's a big question that's got to be answered.
One more off of what you just said. Where does Hurts stand? Because there's all sorts of speculation. He doesn't know. He doesn't like motion. I don't know that. I mean, people are speculating. Where is Jalen comfortable with that? Because we've used this example. It's a little extreme, but it's true. Peyton Manning did not want pre-snap motion. None. He wanted none. He's like Harrison on one side, Reggie Wayne on the other. That's it. He'll figure it. And Dallas Clark is his head in. He'll figure it out. This is what he wanted. We talked to Bill Klein about that last time we had Bill on our show a couple years ago. That's just not every quarterback wants motion. So that's another discussion. How they should have Jalen in the should have him in the interviews.
Right. This was so much easier last year when Shane leaves and they felt they had an in-house guy because they've got the cocoon. They've got, all right, we'll just promote Brian. We still have Kevin Patullo as our pass game coordinator. We still have our offensive line coach who does the run game, and we still have our head coach. We've got the cauldron here, and Brian just has to come and be a part of it like he has been, and then call the plays on game day. I think everybody would love to think that the only problem here was that Brian was not a good play caller and that you just get rid of him, put somebody. If that were the case, they could just put Kevin Patullo there and say, we're fine. Yeah. But they're not doing that. They're basically, they're bringing somebody in. Yeah. So you don't do that, in my opinion, right? Or logically, you don't do that unless you plan to make sure this guy has a certain amount of autonomy. But again, if I'm walking into a situation, it's like when you walk into a room and everybody knows each other, but you don't know them that well, and they're trying to welcome you in, but it's a clique. You already know these guys are buddies. They've all been together, and now I got to appeal to that. It's an uneasy feeling, right?
It is. It's really not comfortable. It's so funny. I'd never thought of that, but in terms of this stuff, what we're talking about here, but it is true. When you travel and you go somewhere where everyone knows each other and you don't know them, you're like, okay, this is not going to be comfortable.
Yeah. You remember the movies, The Lost Boys in the 80s?
Oh, God.
Vampire? Come on, Michael, join us.
Right.
He's like, I don't know. You guys all look like vampires.
Dude, your recall's not quite the camera, but it's close. Anyway, I had to say it. My boy, Joe.
All right, let me tell everybody, Adam, while we're on the subject of a new season, right? It's a new year, and whether your resolution is to save money, eat better, or stress less, HelloFresh is here to help you do all three. Say hello to your most delicious year yet with fresh ingredients and chef-crafted recipes at a price you'll like, delivered right to your door. So you've resolved to actually sit down and eat dinner at the dinner table. I know I try to do that as much as possible. But what do you do about those nights when your schedule is packed? You turn to HelloFresh's lineup of quick and easy meals. That includes their 15-minute recipes, which are designed to help minimize the meal time stress. I tell you, Adam, that's my kind of meal right there. Every time I make a HelloFresh meal, whether it's one of those quick and easy ones or just the normal ones that you can, take your time and cut up all the veggies and all that stuff and the spices, well, we're blown away by the freshness, the taste, and the overall quality of the food. We've tried so many great options. I always say the shrimp Creole stew is still my favorite one. HelloFresh makes food for everyone, though. Meat lovers, seafood lovers, vegetarians, anyone who loves variety. They offer everything that you could want. So go to HelloFresh.com, and here's a great new deal from HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com/EaglesFree and use the code EaglesFree. It's all one word for free breakfast for life. That's one breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. So if you're active with the HelloFresh for the rest of your life, you're going to get a free breakfast for the rest of your life, one per box.
I got to get
breakfast.
that, man.
Yeah, you got to get on that, man. That's
Damn,
HelloFresh.
I'm a big breakfast guy. I'm a big breakfast guy. I'm just going to say, some people are, I am. I really am. Wow.
I used to be. I have now reversed it more, but yeah, I'm not as much anymore. But I would still love every once in a while you pop the free breakfast and you can't not do that. So that's HelloFresh.com/EaglesFree, one word, EaglesFree, and use the code EaglesFree. Act now for America's #1 meal kit. All right, so to wrap it up, like, do you look at this with a degree of skepticism now on how this is going to unfold? I think the defensive coordinator is different. I don't think Nick Sirianni has any. We'll find out. He does have a mandate about allowing explosive plays, which may factor in, and we'll get into that in a second. But I don't think a defensive coordinator may be worried as much about this guy interfering. He just might be worried about the rug getting pulled out under him 7 games into the season. But the offensive coordinator,
I try to warn people, like, you got to understand. You and I talk to so many coaches. That's the point. Whether it's offense or defense is irrelevant. It's just overall. If you're bringing someone in, they have to feel like the head coach. I talked to so many coaches the last couple of weeks around the league. I know you have too. The one thing that always comes up is, how stable is this job going to be? Is this guy going to get fired?
right?
Like that. We're not talking about the Eagles. We're just talking overall where they're going to go, because they got to move their family unless they're not married.
Yep.
But if they've got a family, you're not going to want to go somewhere where you know the guy could get clipped. That doesn't work like that. That's the way guys. It's the first thing they think is, what's my stability? Because it's a very brutal business. Most assistant coaches have been fired at least once in their career if they've been in the league 10 years. It's almost impossible not to be fired at one point, or not to have when you're with a staff, sometimes you get swept up with all of them. So that stuff matters, man, because they all mention it. I mean, just about.
Well, think about 2020. Okay.
Yeah.
That's Doug Peterson. You are going to coach with these coaches. Rich Scangarello, you're in. Marty Morningweg, you're in. Andrew Briner, you're in. I think they hired Marquand Manuel that year to be defensive backs coach, right? Because they were making a switch there. You're in. I think they hired their 1100th wide receiver coach that year. You're in. And guess what? Almost everybody got axed at the end of that year. Think about how many people were thinking, like, all right, this is a successful organization, right? I'm joining. They were in the playoffs 2 years in a row after winning the Super Bowl. What could go wrong? Well, everything went wrong that year. And then 90% of the staff got canned. The only people who got retained, right, were the Jeff Stoutland and Denard Wilson. Did he keep his job from Doug to? Because Marquand Manuel was the corners coach, and I thought Denard was not on the staff.
He wasn't on.
No. So it might have been everybody except for
Aaron Moorhead. Aaron Moorhead was retained.
Oh yeah, no. I thought Moorhead was.
I think he was on Doug's staff. Was he not?
You're right, because they were changing him every year. So yeah, Moorhead, Washburn, and Stoutland.
Yeah.
So everybody else was basically there, like, hey, this is gonna be great. We're gonna lead this great Eagles comeback, and then they all get fired at the end of the year.
Yeah, and it's again, whether it's OC, DC, position coach, whatever it may be, these guys, they're going to want to know about stability. And for Howie and Nick, when they do these interviews, and I don't know how they're, Nick will basically the way it works with teams is like if the GM's involved, and I'm sure Howie is, if he has guys that he gets suggested and go, hey, we've heard about this guy, talk to him, and Nick will decide whether it works or not.
Mhm.
But that's the thing is because they've had such a good thing going here. They've really turned this thing around since Nick came in, and then they have this awful fall, and you find both coordinators. It's almost hard to believe. Like what's happened this past season, never would have believed it,
Mhm.
but it's happened. And plus, there's going to be position coaches on on whatever. And a lot of defense, you have to think that there are going to be some changes there because the coordinator's
Yeah.
gone.
Yep.
And you want to get. Oh, here's another thing. One more thing before we get out of here.
Mhm.
We'll talk about defense very quickly. You're gonna want to make sure that if the coordinator wants to bring some of his own guys, he can do that. That's if you want a really good guy who's been around, you're gonna want to give that guy a little bit of autonomy, aren't you? Or can he bring some of his guys in?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the thing is, I wonder how many of these guys that were brought in. We don't really know, like the J.D. Elliott's to coach the linebackers, and we know Ronell Williams, who was the Nickelbacks coach, worked with Sean Desai in Chicago. So I have to think that was Sean getting one of his guys in. But DK McDonald was already here, correct?
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that's Nick's guy. That's Nick's
yeah.
guy.
And J.D. Elliott, I don't know. He was at Temple once, but not when Sean Desai was. I
DJ,
really
is it
don't know.
DJ Elliott?
I'm sorry, DJ Elliott. Yes, correct. And then who was the other? Wasn't there an assistant defensive backs coach that was brought in?
Yeah, they had. Well, right. They had. Did they have three of them?
Yes. It
Okay.
wasn't just Ronell Williams and DK McDonald. There was another name in there who's I'm just forgetting right now. If you give me a second, I'll check the website. But there were three. I remember us saying, like, how many defensive backs coaches does a team need? I've never heard of a Nichols coach before, but they brought in Ronell
Oh,
Williams.
Taver Johnson. Yeah, Taver Johnson came
Yes,
from
Taver
Temple as
Johnson.
well.
Thank you.
Who
Yeah.
was he? Did he what? Coach was another team knew him, and I'm wondering if the guy had to be in the NFL before. Yes, he was. He was with the Raiders early in his career.
Right.
He also coached in college football. Pretty.
Yep.
Guy spoke and said he said the guy's a good coach. Again, we don't know what the hell happened here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's assistant DBs. He was at Eastern Michigan, the Raiders before that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Raiders for a couple years, but then almost college the rest of his career. So
He was also a defensive coordinator at Temple.
now here's the question: Taver Johnson, was he named that and then left? Because he never wound up coaching.
No, he did in 2017. He was Temple's defensive coordinator.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, he did. Yeah. But 17, 6 years ago. Yes.
You know what? Now it's all coming back to me. I remember when we were talking about how he coached like Hassan Reddick, I believe, and how DJ Elliott was at Colorado when Davion Taylor was there. Remember, we were like, "Oh,
There you go.
we got the
Yep.
Davion Taylor whisper,"
I
and
remember
Davion
that.
didn't even make it out of OTA. So I was, yeah, I do think that you're right. I think this time around, and we'll see if the organization confronts some of its challenges with its hiring, or if they just say, let's hire a veteran defensive coordinator who has coaches in mind that we know of, we heard of, are proven, and let's let that person reshape the staff. The history says that's not always the case because the head coach and the GM also get involved in and bring their guys in too. Even the GM likes to bring in guys that he knows of around the league. So I don't know.
I'm just like one thing. Taver Johnson's career is like pretty impressive from a college standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
He also coached with the Browns many moons, like 20 years ago.
He coached corners at Ohio State, and that's a cornerback
That's
factory.
a pretty good coach. See, okay, so let's stay on the defense coordinator, and we'll get done here. So, this is the thing. Again, you want to give whoever that guy's going to be. You want to give him the ability to bring his own coaches. It just didn't work. Okay, the side thing didn't work. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shame it didn't work. It didn't work. But you never go in as a head coach think it won't work.
Right.
You tried. Okay, it didn't work. You go in this season. Nick knows what's going on here. He's not immune. He certainly knows now how Jeffrey felt. And this thing's got to be good. I mean, they got to get this thing turned around. So Howie and Nick have got to give the new coordinator on this side of the football the autonomy to run the kind of scheme he wants. We know Nick wants to not get explosive and get explosive on offense. That's fine. He loves that Fangio system. Well, now Ron Rivera, I guess ESPN reported that they're going to interview him. Ron, they actually ran not Fangio per se, but they changed their coverage scheme to match carry deliver 2 years ago, which floored me when he did that because it's a complete departure from what they were doing. He did it kind of in season.
That's got to be difficult.
Yeah, I don't know, but and Ron took over play calling twice in his career with Washington. Because he fired his friend Del Rio, and then I think he also did it maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But I'm not saying they're hiring him, but I just find it interesting, at this point of Ron's career, that they were talking about potentially being in DC. But again, the system it's fascinating because Nick loves that Fangio system because it does, when it's run the right way. A lot of the Fangio guys were the guys who are running Fangio this year Vic himself had the worst injury problems you can imagine. They were down 6 starters at the end of the season.
Right.
A lot of them, for whatever reason, some didn't work. But if you talk to those teams, they'll tell you didn't have the personnel, that and the other, whatever. They could have done a better job. But that one, you got to have the right corners. Like if you don't, it has no chance to work. Another thing for the new coordinator, whoever it is, and whatever system they're going to run, you got to give that guy players too, because this defense, man, from a personnel standpoint, clearly wasn't good enough, and everyone watching knows that.
Yeah, the Rivera thing, I think you make a fascinating point. I mean, he in Washington, whether it was him or Jack Del Rio, they were generally running 4-man fronts. I mean, they had 2 really good defensive tackle, like three technique or 5 technique type defensive tackles with Deron Payne and with Jonathan Allen, and they had 2 edge rushers with Montez Sweat and Chase Young. They were not a bare front. They were not a 5-man look. So, I mean, I think when he was in San Diego,
of course, but yeah.
Right. When he was in San Diego, I think and this is a long time ago now. I think they did run a 3-4, but that was more of a pure, you have rush and cover outside linebackers, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it certainly wasn't Fangio-ish, because this was almost, God, about 10, 12 years ago now. So,
long time ago. Yeah.
So when he looks at the question has to be asked, we have Jordan Davis here. We have a monster DT. Like, can you work with the Fangio style front, or the 5-man front that we are known for? I think that question has to be asked, and I think they have to be looking for someone, unless they want to totally revamp the personnel, trade David. I don't know, but I would think that you got to find somebody who can work within the confines of what you want to do.
Yeah, Ron was the coordinator for the Chargers for 3 years. And then he became the Panthers head coach in 2011. So yeah, it's obviously been a long time since he's actually been a full-time coordinator. But his career mostly has been in 43. Yeah, and zone coverage. So we'll see. It's just fascinating. I thought that was an interesting one that is out there. At this point in his career, Ron's been through a lot. He's in his 60s now. But you're always wondering about how much energy. Think about the weight that he had to carry with working for Daniel Snyder all those years, plus Ron at personnel control. This might be just good for him anyway if he coaches again, just to get back to doing football and not having to worry about the other stuff.
Definitely. All right, one last thing I want to get to, Adam, really quickly. First, I do want to remind everybody, it definitely sucks for Eagles fans to have to watch the divisional round, not the conference championships this weekend, knowing the Eagles are in it. Also, what sucks is trying to find good tickets online. Not if you have Game Time, though. It's the fast, easy way to buy tickets for sporting events, concerts, and theater shows near you. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And right now on the Game Time app, you're just 2 taps away from tickets to any of the local sports teams, college hoops. You can see comedy shows, concerts. And the best part is the Game Time app offers event cancellation protection and job loss protection. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. Their all-in prices show you the total up front, and you can see the view from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect at checkout. Game Time's obsessed with helping you save money. They got the zone deals that let you pick the section while Game Time picks the seats, so you get the best savings. And then there's the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use code BIRDS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the redeem code BIRDS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Adam, before we get out of here, one thing we haven't done yet is just kind of go a little quick synopsis of the Eagles' schedule next year and who they're going to play. We're not going to go through and analyze the games, but I just wanted to, just give out who they're playing because it doesn't look like another easy schedule for them with cupcakes. You already know the division games, Washington, New York, and Dallas, but at Cincinnati next year, assuming the quarterback is healthy, that's probably a tough game. At Baltimore next year, at New Orleans, always a tough place to play at New Orleans, right? Atlanta Falcons at home. We'll see what happens with them with their new coach. They definitely have a lot of defensive talent and some pretty good playmakers on offense. Carolina Panthers at home. Cleveland Browns at home, coming off a very good year. Another team that made the playoffs, right? Pittsburgh Steelers next year, team that made the playoffs. LA Rams in LA. All right. Matthew Stafford certainly came back strong this year. At Tampa Bay next year, a team that just embarrassed them in the playoffs. And home against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Adam, that's a lot of, even if some of the teams I mentioned that didn't make the playoffs, like the Jaguars, had a winning record. There aren't too many other than Carolina there, right? And maybe Atlanta, which had a losing. It just didn't feel like a whole lot of layups on that schedule.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta's got a new defense, and we'll see what it looks like. And Ryan Nielsen comes over from Atlanta to run the Jaguars defense. So we'll see. He runs a 34 generally. He'd do both, but he runs a 34. Yeah, it's what we'll do. Now's not really the time to do it. We'll do it later, but we'll go when we have time. We'll go game to game, and we'll give you kind of what it looks like. And obviously, those teams are going to lose some free agents. They're going to get some.
Sure, yeah.
Draft. But yeah, we'll do that another time.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to give everybody a quick peek because it was the end of the year and everything was settled here. And again, my first glance was, you know what? I remember 2 years ago, Nick Sirianni's first year, looking at the schedule and being like, wow, there's some cupcakes here. We'll see. The Eagles themselves are
of course, you never know.
Yeah, but you never know. But here, this one, you have a lot of historically good teams, so that'll be interesting. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. As always, we thank you for flying with us inside the birds. Be sure to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com and on Twitter at phlsportsnation.